Tonight on Primetime Politics, engaging with U.S. governors. The Alberta Premier Danielle Smith holds meetings with her U.S. counterparts, making the case for Canadian trade and Alberta oil. Coming up, we'll speak with the Premier and we'll ask, do the governors agree with Donald Trump's 25% tariff threat? Also,
they've been fighting for a number of weeks now, but now is the time to come to a negotiated agreement.
As the Canada Post strike drags on, we'll look at the impact it's having on small businesses, and we'll speak with the union for the striking workers. How long are they willing to withhold their service? And
that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for all of this year is material.
We're on the eve of another Bank of Canada rate decision. We'll get a preview of what to expect. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The incoming U.S. president is taking to social media once again, adding to last week's reference to Canada as America's 51st state and demoting the Prime Minister to the rank of governor. Check out the post. Donald J. Trump writing, "It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade, the results of which will be truly spectacular for all." Now, it's unknown why Donald Trump made his post this time around. It does follow comments made by the Prime Minister yesterday about retaliatory tariffs. But from the Finance Minister this afternoon, this comment about what really matters right now, which is not Donald Trump's midnight musings.
We are the largest market for the United States by far, bigger than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. That is significant. And it's also significant that they get stuff from us that they need. They get oil from us, they get electricity, they get uranium, they get critical minerals and metals. And I am absolutely convinced that the economic realities of that relationship, the economic reality of a win-win relationship, will ultimately prevail.
The social media post also comes as the U.S. Western governors come together in Las Vegas for their winter meeting, a get-together that is attended this week by at least 2 Canadian premiers, one of whom is Alberta's Danielle Smith, as she talks about trade and the importance of the Canada-U.S. relationship. Well, joining us now in Vegas is the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, thank you for making the time again.
Hi, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with your conversation that you had with the South Dakota Governor, Kristi Noem, who also happens to be Donald Trump's pick for Homeland Security in the United States. I'm wondering what she had to say to you regarding the concerns raised by Mr. Trump on fentanyl and migrants along our shared border.
Well, I wanted to proactively raise that with her, that we have heard loud and clear that the president is concerned about both borders. And in Alberta, we know that one of the main concerns is the cross-border trafficking of drugs, particularly deadly fentanyl. We've been having a crisis in Alberta of opioid addiction and overdose for a number of years. And I think we jointly benefit from being able to stop organized crime and to be able to stop that flow of drugs. And we're prepared to do our part in Alberta.
Prepared to do your part. What does that actually mean?
What we have been looking at is how we might be able to use our sheriffs and some of the technologies that we developed in forest firefighting. We've been using night vision helicopters and drones with infrared capability as a ability to, we think, be able to monitor that border, hopefully working in conjunction with the Canadian Border Services as well as the RCMP, and we've indicated to the federal government that we're prepared to integrate our resources with their national plan. And barring that, we want to get at least started with our cross-border friends in Montana.
Mm-hmm. So how did Governor Noem receive that message from you then?
Look, I mean, it was a brief conversation, just wanting to let her know that we take it seriously. And I've had a number of other conversations with many governors down here, just advancing our interest, because I think we will get onto the trade discussion once they know that we're serious about addressing the border concerns. But I think that the significant benefit that Americans get from our mutual trade relationship, it has been another key factor of what I've been talking about down here.
Yeah, and of course we are concerned here in Canada about the 25% tariff threat that was made by Donald Trump in that social media post. I'm wondering, when you spoke to other governors from the western states, what they had to say about that tariff, whether they too are concerned or whether or not they see the merit in it.
I think it's part of our job is to make sure that our American friends understand just how integrated our economies are and how much they benefit from the trade relationship. That's part of the reason I'm here. I mean, Alberta has 4.3 million barrels a day of oil that we sent down to the United States. There are many refineries that are special purpose built to be able to receive Canadian heavy oil, including refineries in Ohio, which is the Vice President's home state. If you end up seeing a 25% increase in the oil going into a refinery, it gets passed on to consumers in higher gasoline prices. So I think every governor has taken note when I've said that we've heard that it could be as much as a $1 difference, a $1 additional cost per gallon by adding a 25% tariff. We know that there are other states who benefit from the electricity transport as well. If you put a 25% increase on the cost of electricity, that's also going to have an impact. So I think if we lead with understanding how the impact is going to hurt American consumers, I think we're going to have a very strong case to make about why we deserve a carve-out, because we have a very special relationship with the United States.
Mm-hmm. Now, you did appear on Fox Business while there in the U.S. You talked about more oil production benefiting both Canada and the U.S. Do you see oil as the main card Canada has to play in terms of ensuring cross-border trade stays open?
Energy for sure is both electricity as well as oil, as well as LNG. I mean, I talked to the Hawaii governor, and they currently receive very dirty kind of sulfur-laden bunker fuel as their oil, and they're looking to have LNG. And, you know, it's the same argument. If you put 25% tariff on LNG, it's also going to be more expensive. And so I think that the energy picture is important from an affordability point of view. But the Americans also have a lot of friends and allies that they want to have a secure supply of energy, and we're perfectly situated to not only provide to America, but also through especially Trans Mountain and Coastal GasLink, be able to provide that essential fuel to American allies as well. So I think that there's a way for us to meet our NATO commitment, our national security commitment, and talk to the Americans in the terms that they understand that we're an equal partner. And so that's what I'm advancing. Okay. And I think that's our strongest leg to go out on.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, on the flip side of that, I guess, you know, we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday. He was addressing the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and he said, you know, openly what's been discussed in meetings, that Canada would respond to U.S. tariffs with Canadian tariffs. Do you agree that Canada should be prepared to retaliate? And do you agree that it's important to send that message right now?
I think we have to put it into context that we're fighting with a nation that has a $27 trillion economy, and our exports are about $400 or $500 billion. So proportionately, they can weather it more than we can. When our economy is a fraction of theirs, it's a much larger hit on our side. And if we were to add 25% tariffs across the board on everything coming across the border, then that's going to hurt Canadian consumers when we're right in the middle of an affordability crisis. So I would say our better strategy is to lead with the areas of common ground, identify the issues that they care about. They've told us it's border security. They've told us it's our NATO commitment. They've told us they don't want Canada to be a backdoor for China to bring cheap products into the American market. Let's address those things. And then let's get back to talking about the very strong trade relationship that we have. And I think that is, we should be making a full court press on that. The president gave us an advance warning of what's coming, but that also gives us an advanced amount of time to be able to address it. And so that's what I'm trying to do by making sure that we've got the resources available to do our part to defend the border, as well as to make sure that they understand just how important energy is to meet their security and affordability needs.
Mm-hmm. Now, quickly running time, but I did want to ask you before we're done here, because you are going to be attending Mr. Trump's inauguration next month in D.C. I'm wondering if that decision to go is a personal one for you, or you on a more professional level, you think it's the right thing to do, an important thing to do in this moment?
Well, Ontario and Alberta and Quebec have all had a presence in Washington. I note that the Manitoba Premier Wabkanu has announced that he's going to also open up a Washington office. I think that in the past, perhaps, when we've had trade peace, having the federal government lead on those efforts may have been the only strategy that many provinces pursued. But I think we now realize that we've got to take a lead in also making sure that that relationship stays strong. So I would have gone regardless of who's in the White House. I've been spending a lot of time in the United States, as you may know, starting last year when I went to the CERA Week in Houston. And so I intend to be making quite a few trips here. I've got another trip. I'm here down for the Washington Governors meeting, the Western Governors meeting, pardon me. I'll be going to the National Governors Conference. I'll be meeting with the Governors Coalition for Energy Security. I'll be going to CERA Week again. And so I think that this is part of what you have to do when you're a premier who has a trade-dependent relationship. You go and visit your partner and you make the case for why we need to keep those ties strong.
Premier Smith, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
You bet. Thanks, Michael.
To the Canadian postal workers strike now, as that strike is nearing its fourth week, and the federal government is still hoping the two sides can come to a solution on their own.
Minister McKinnon has again talked to them just a few hours ago. You know, they are in constant conversation. A special mediator has been nominated by the federal government, but that again speaks to the absolute importance of those two parties to come together and come to an agreement.
That was the Procurement Minister, Jean-Yves Duclos. Now, on Monday, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers sent management its latest list of proposals. It includes a reduced wage ask, now looking for a 19% increase over 4 years, instead of the original 22 to 24%. But Canada Post says the offer still does not bring the two sides any closer to a resolution. Not great news for many, including the Canadian Retail Council, that says the strike is already costing retailers, both big and small, nearly $1 billion in lost revenue and counting. Well, with more on the labour dispute, we're now joined by Matt Poirier. He's from the Retail Council of Canada. Matt, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So here we are, 4 weeks into this strike. I'm wondering, first and foremost, what impact this has had on retailers right across the country.
It's been pretty significant. I mean, the strikes that came before this, with the port strike and the rail strike earlier in the summer, were pretty detrimental. And this one's just the third in a row. Unfortunately for retailers, this has been 4 weeks going at this point, and it's at the busiest time of year for retail, the holiday shopping season. So it's been hard on the sector, but also it's been hard on Canadians who are more and more trying to shop online, and this has meant a real dent in those plans for them too.
Yeah, they're trying to reach new customers. You talk about the importance of this time of year, and we know that the holiday season is, in any given year, very important for retailers right across the country. But, it also follows what has been, beyond the labor disputes that you talked about, it also follows what has been hard economic times for Canadians. So talk to us about the kind of difficulty this creates for retailers financially.
Well, we've seen it in our sales numbers all throughout the year. It's been a really slow year, really hard year for retailers. So, like I said, these labor disruptions can't come at a worse time for us, because often the holiday season is when retailers try to recuperate their year, or in fact make their year. So the fact that it's been sluggish in the lead up, and now they have all these disruptions added on top of that, it just complicates things for them further. And even though the government just announced that GST holiday, which we certainly welcome, and that'll help encourage people to go shop, it's a lot of logistical nightmares for retailers to figure that out in a few short weeks. So that's rolling out on Friday. We're hopeful that the impact will be positive, but it's a lot for them to handle all at once.
Yeah, a strike, a new tax regime there. I'm wondering, though, because you mentioned the government, and here we have the government still very intent on having the two sides, Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, very intent on having the two sides come to an agreement on their own. What do you make of that strategy?
Well, we certainly support it. And as we've said in our public statements, retailers agree that the best agreements are reached at the negotiating table. The problem we have right now is they ain't at the negotiating table, and it's been over a week that they haven't been. So, something needs to happen in order to get this moving again. And we really are despairing in industry here that there doesn't seem to be any sort of urgency in either of the parties to resolve this. And like I said, it's been 4 weeks. We've stepped in before sooner. I think it's time that for retailers, it's long been time that something needs to happen to break the logjam.
Matt, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Well, let's continue the conversation now with Jim Gallant. He is a union negotiator with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Jim, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I'm going to ask this question, and I will preface this by saying I know it takes two to tango. It's not just CUPW, it's also Canada Post trying to negotiate something here. But, we just heard from the Canadian Retail Council. They're talking about just how hard this strike has been on their members, the amount of money that they are losing. From the union perspective, what do you say to them? Is CUPW not concerned about the economic hardship this strike is essentially making?
We're concerned about those retailers, and we're concerned about our members. Members, 55,000 of us, are the people that go to those retail shops and buy, and we pay our taxes and all that. But we're in the midst of where we're not making any money. Period. It's not that our business is in decline. We are not making money, and we need Canada Post to come to the table to get a fair deal.
Okay, you say you're not making any money. In fact, I think it might be worthwhile to bring up a list of your demands right now, because as it stands, the latest demands that the union has put to Canada Post is a 19% increase in wages across 4 years, cost of living allowances, 10 days medical leave in addition to 7 personal days, and an increase in short-term disability payments. You talk about not making money right now, but I don't know what you necessarily mean by that. But I think for the average Canadian, when they hear a demand of 19% across 4 years plus cost of living, it would raise an eyebrow. What do you say to that?
So it's not plus cost of living. It's 19%, and if 19% doesn't keep up with the cost of living, that triggers a payment. But for the first 25 years of my career, I received no COLA payment, no cost of living allowance. So it's been only the last few years since the pandemic hit that happened, because we were at a 2% raise and inflation was at 6%.
Mm-hmm. But when you say you're not making any money right now, can you build on that? Because
I'm talking about being out on strike. Okay. Right now, people are not making anything. We have a small strike pay of $56 a day. That's not a lot of money in today's market. People have been out for 4 weeks. It's not just retailers that are hurting, it's our members that are hurting, and we're not out here for fun. This is to make sure that the future is there, and if it weren't for postal workers fighting for it, the Postal Service may not be here today. Canada Post on a regular basis does things that don't necessarily end up working out. We're trying to save that. If it weren't for postal workers, no one would have door-to-door delivery. Parcels may not be delivered by the post office if it weren't for the union.
If it weren't for the union. But let's go back to that, though. A 19% increase in wages across 4 years. When you look at the average, many workers have been getting 3.4%, 3.5%. This works out to almost 5% across 4 years. What justifies that demand? If
you look in the federal sector, and that's not just the public service, it's private and public, the first year, right now, if you look at the numbers, it's 5 point something, and then the rest are 4s, 4.3 to 4.5. That's what the average is. So when you're talking about averages, some are above and some are below. We just suffered through 2 years of 2%. And like I say, interest rates or inflation was quite high, and we're trying to make up for some of what we lost through that inflation.
Mm-hmm. Are you worried about alienating customers who may seek alternatives from Canada Post and never come back?
Well, we always are, but you can see from what's going on in the news that retailers really depend on Canada Post because they're a little bit lower price alternative, and we deliver to places that other carriers don't go. So those customers hopefully will come back. They always have in the past, and we appreciate that. But that's part of the problem is Canada Post hasn't put postage rates up in quite a while, and they announced last May that they were going to put postage up 25%, and that's going to happen on on January the 13th, a month from now. And it'll be, isn't it a coincidence that it's after when they thought they were going to have to make a deal with us? So they're asking for 25% in 1 year, and we're asking for 19% over 4. It seems realistic that our number should be the good number.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Labour Minister, Steve McKinnon, he spoke to both sides over the weekend. Do you know what he said? Because publicly, going into the weekend, he was expressing disappointment at the two sides. What was said over the weekend?
I wasn't a part of that call, but the minister was in touch with the union, and I think he was in touch with the employer. But he's been very clear that he wants us to reach a deal. But he's not the only one that's disappointed. I had announced for the union on Friday. We were very disappointed, and now the employer yesterday announced that they're extremely disappointed. So I guess the disappointment goes all the way around.
Well, so much so that the federal mediator walked away because he said the two sides are too far apart. And to that, Steve McKinnon said that both sides are being highly disrespectful right now. So what do you want to see happen next? You know, what role do you think the government needs to play? Does Steve McKinnon need to come in and break the impasse?
Minister Duclos is the one that probably is the important one in this category. He is the minister in charge of Canada Post, and they have every responsibility and ability to tell Canada Post to come to the table and come to the right deal. Minister Duclos, the week before last, said that he expected Canada Post not to make a profit, that they needed to be self-sustaining in some manner, but then have good and stable jobs. And what Canada Post has come to the table with is not that. So that's what the union is fighting for, and we thought the minister had sent a message, but obviously Canada Post didn't hear that message.
How long do you think this might drag on for?
I hope it's over tomorrow.
Okay. Jim Gallant, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
The Bank of Canada is set to make its latest rate decision tomorrow, and many economists and observers believe we will see not only another cut, but also a 50 basis point cut, driven by inflation, which is now within the Bank of Canada's target range.
From the time that following the COVID recession, Canada experienced global inflation and the high interest rates which followed, our government's focus has been on supporting the Bank of Canada in getting inflation down and then interest rates down. And so the fact that that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for all of this year is material.
Well, joining us now is Pedro Antunes, Chief Economist at the Conference Board of Canada. Pedro, thank you for dropping by.
It's a pleasure, Michael, as always.
So here we have the Bank of Canada with another decision tomorrow. And at this point, it is expected by many that we're going to look at another 50 basis point cut. So let's use that as our starting point. Begin here with the reasons why the bank may be inclined to do that.
Well, I mean, essentially, we're still sitting in a situation where interest rates are restrictive. In other words, interest rates are high enough that they are taking away from economic growth. And in terms of, kind of a policy, the bank wants to be in a situation where it's no longer taking away nor adding. In other words, they want to get to that kind of neutral rate, especially when we're seeing, I think, a lot of weakness still in the economy and a lot of stress in the economy, a lot of risks. We can talk about south of the border, but we can also talk about all of the households that still have not renewed at higher rates that are still going to be taking a hit. So when you look at economic growth over the last few quarters, you're seeing a very flat performance for Canada and no reason really to keep interest rates restrictive still.
Okay, no reason, except that there are those that are cautioning the Bank of Canada from going too aggressively too quickly. What are the reasons that they are making?
Yeah, I think it's more, I think, personally, from a standpoint from the bank, that they had that experience when they were going to put rates on hold back in 2023. It was the summer of 2023, and we saw real estate markets taking off again, and that made them a little bit nervous. So I think they want to kind of manage that soft landing, not get interest rates down too quickly to let things pick up too quickly as well. But yeah, so I think it's more of prudence on on the bank's part to make sure that they've got inflation all the way to zero and that there's not anything still permeating. You could argue that there are still things that are fairly hot in the economy, and one of them is wages. And when you look at wages, in the last reading, they came down to around that 4% year over year, but they've been really tenacious at, in that close to that 5% range. And that makes a central banker nervous, because a 5% wage is not in line with a 2% inflation target. It's just too high, and that will eventually lead to further inflationary pressures. So I think that's kind of the argument that the care that the bank is taking in its move.
Well, since you say inflationary pressures, and I'm thinking about the GST holiday that's about to begin across the country for 2 months, the fact that the Trudeau government also wants to distribute $250 checks to every working Canadian. Opposition parties want to see that expanded. How does the bank factor those policy decisions into its own decision about the rate, or does it at all?
Well, I think we do have very clear central bank independence, because there's two issues. You just talked about these policy changes that will be stimulative on the economy, and so I think the bank does have to consider these, or will take consideration of the impacts of that. Now, it's important to remember that when we look at total CPI, if you're lowering the tax rate, that is actually going to have a negative impact on the CPI, even if it does generate some economic activity and more consumer spending. So in general, a reduction in your retail sales tax should be deflationary. So I think the bank wouldn't be too concerned about that. The extra stimulus in the $250 per person, that is a massive amount of stimulus. It comes at a time when the economy is weak, consumer spending is weak. So in that sense, perhaps the timing isn't as bad as some of the measures we saw back in 2023 when inflation was really running hot. So, I think that's one of the things the bank has to watch out for. The other thing I was alluding to is the changes that the federal government has announced in terms of immigration, and these will have a huge impact at lowering, I think, economic activity if we do see those drastic changes in the flows of immigrants in 2025. So, and I say that because I don't, the bank published the monetary policy report in October, and we didn't see any of that demographic how should I say, reality in their forecast.
Okay, so something to watch out for. So I'm wondering then, given the pros, the cons you've outlined, what's your expectation?
Well, it's hard, obviously, to read the central bankers' minds, but originally we were thinking 25 basis points. The labor force numbers came in last Friday, very strong employment numbers, but the unemployment rate ticked up even higher now, where you've got an unemployment rate that's close to 7%, and I think that's enough that it'll allow the bank to be comfortable in lowering 50 basis points. The other thing that's important here is the market expectation, as you alluded to as well. And I think the bank wouldn't want to surprise necessarily, and I think it may lean to a 50 basis point decline. Okay, so 50 basis points, something to watch out for tomorrow. But before you go, I also want to ask you about the fall economic statement, of course, coming in much later this year than in years past. And while we heard from the finance minister say today that it would be within their debt to GDP ratio guardrail, she would not actually comment on the deficit, which a lot of people think this government has blown through. How concerning is that? Well, I mean, it's another situation where, if we look back in the last 2 or 3 budgets, certainly in the last 2 budgets, we've seen kind of better than expected revenue projections or revenue outcomes for the federal government, and we've leaned towards spending more of those. In other words, we've not improved on the deficit situation. We've taken that extra revenue and allowed our spending to increase. So there, in this upcoming economic statement, there may well be another upswing in revenues. It's hard for us to know, but certainly I don't think we need any more stimulus in the economy at this time. It'd be nice to put some of that away, especially given that the $250 per household. This is really a kind of measure that is going to be much more broad-based than it needs to be. If we're really concerned about lower-income households that are struggling with the challenges of inflation and higher interest rates, we could find more targeted measures. Yeah, more targeted measures. And of course, the fall economic statement is next Monday. You and I will probably be speaking around then once again. But for now, Pedro, thank you very much for the time. You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
And that is our program for this Tuesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, take care.